What would you do if the world laughed as it stole your heart's only light? One woman's vengeance burns brighter than the desert sun, and a stranger's shadow rides beside her. Welcome to a tale of grit, love, and a mother's unbreakable will. The wind howled across the parched flats of Coyote's End, New Mexico, in the spring of 1884, kicking up dust that stung like 1,000 needles. The horizon shimmered under a sun that offered no mercy, its light glinting off the cracked earth where nothing grew but stubborn weeds. A lone rider carved through the haze, her black mare's hooves striking the ground like a war drum. Her coat, patched and weathered, snapped in the gusts, and her hat, wide-brimmed and stained with sweat, shadowed a face that held no softness. She was a woman forged by loss, her purpose sharper than the revolver at her hip. She had no name in these parts, not yet. To the scattered ranchers and drifters, she was just a silhouette against the sky, a ghost with eyes like burning coals. Her hair, chestnut brown and cropped short, peeked from beneath her hat, framing a face marked by a faint scar across her chin, a reminder of a night she'd survived when others hadn't. At 32, she carried the weight of a life that had taken more than it gave. Her hands, gloved in worn leather, gripped the reins tightly, steadying the mare as they approached the ramshackle town. Coyote's End was a place where hope came to die. Its single street was lined with sagging saloons, a general store with a broken sign, and a church too small to hold the town's sins. The townsfolk, weathered by sun and hardship, paused as she rode in. Men slouched outside the Drunken Mule saloon, their laughter coarse, their eyes narrowing at the sight of her dust-caked boots and the rifle slung across her saddle. Women in faded calico dresses whispered behind calloused hands, shaking their heads. A woman like her, alone, armed, unbowed, didn't belong in a place like this. She dismounted with a grace that belied her weariness, her boots thudding softly on the dirt. The mare stood still, its dark eyes unblinking, trained by years of trust. She tied the reins to a post and scanned the street, her gaze cutting through the crowd like a blade. The laughter grew louder, mocking, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard it before, in other towns, other saloons, where men thought a woman's pain was a joke and her strength a threat. She pushed open the saloon's swinging doors, her left hand steady, her right brushing the grip of her revolver. The air inside was thick with the stench of whiskey and sweat. The piano stuttered to a halt and a glass shattered somewhere in the back. Every head turned, eyes wide or squinted, as she stepped into the dim light of oil lamps. The bartender, a wiry man with a face like crumpled parchment, froze mid-wipe, his rag dripping. A man in a gaudy vest, adorned with silver buttons, leaned against the bar, smirking. "Lost your way, lady," he drawled, his voice slick as grease. The room chuckled, the sound jagged and mean. She didn't answer. Her boots clicked on the warped floorboards as she moved to the center of the room. "I'm looking for 3 men," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the murmurs like a whip. "One wears a red bandana with bone beads, a scar from jaw to ear. Another's missing his trigger finger. The last has a Confederate medal around his neck. They burned my home. They took my daughter." Silence fell, heavy as a storm cloud. The bartender's eyes darted away. The man with the silver buttons snorted, sipping his drink. "Ain't no fairy tales here, ma'am," he said. "You're chasing ghosts." The laughter returned, nervous now, testing her. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his. "I tracked them through riverbeds and dead towns. They came here. I want names." No one spoke. The bartender coughed, muttering, "No one like that's been through." She didn't blink. Her hand hovered near her revolver, not drawing it, just waiting. The room held its breath, the tension a live wire. Then, a shadow moved outside the saloon's grimy window. A girl no older than 10 with dirt-smudged cheeks and bare feet peered in. Her eyes met the woman's, wide and knowing, before she darted away. The woman's jaw tightened. She turned, pushing through the doors without another word, leaving the laughter to die behind her. The street was quiet now, the sun sinking low, painting the town in blood-red hues. She untied her mare, her fingers steady, but her heart racing. Someone in Coyote's End knew something, and she'd find them. What? Secrets hide in a town that laughs at a mother's pain? Stay with us, because her hunt has only just begun. The night draped Coyote's End in a shroud of stars, their light cold and unyielding over the town's crooked rooftops. The wind had stilled, leaving the air heavy with the scent of sage and dust. She stood in the shadows of the livery stable, her black mare tethered nearby, its breath a soft rhythm in the quiet. Her chestnut hair, cropped short, caught the faint glow of a lantern hanging from a post. Her scar, a thin line across her chin, seemed to pulse with the memory of fire and loss. She was 32, but the weight of her grief made her feel timeless, a blade honed by pain. She'd followed the girl's fleeting shadow from the saloon, her boots silent on the packed earth. The child, no more than 10, had vanished into an alley, but not before dropping a scrap of cloth, a signal, deliberate and small. Now, she waited, her hand resting near the revolver at her hip, its grip worn smooth by years of necessity. The stable's wooden walls creaked, and the faint clink of metal drew her gaze. A man emerged from the darkness, his face half hidden by a battered hat. He was the blacksmith, his single eye gleaming like a coal, his arm thick as an oak branch. "You're asking for trouble," he said, his voice a low growl. "Those men you're after, they were here. 3 of them, just like you said. Red bandana with a scar, one missing a finger, another with a Confederate medal. Bragged about a fire, paid in gold, and rode west 2 days ago. Said something. About Fort Redemption." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag. "That place ain't a fort no more. It's a grave for the foolish." She didn't flinch. "Did they have a girl with them?" Her voice was steady, but her heart thundered, each beat a prayer for her daughter stolen in the blaze that consumed their home. She saw it again, the cabin swallowed by flames, her daughter's drawings of stars charred to ash, the men's laughter as they rode away. The blacksmith shook his head. Didn't see no girl, but they were carrying something heavy. Kept it covered. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said, turning to her mare. The blacksmith grabbed her arm, his grip firm, but not cruel. "You won't make it alone," he warned. "Fort Redemption's a pit of snakes, no law, no mercy." She met his eye, her gaze unyielding. "I've walked through worse." She pulled free and mounted, the mare shifting beneath her, ready to run. As she rode out of Coyote's End, the town's lights faded into the vast dark of the desert. She followed the trail west, guided by starlight and instinct. The memory of that night clawed at her, waking to smoke, dragging herself from the inferno, her lungs burning, her daughter gone. She'd failed her then, but she wouldn't now. The trail was faint, marked by hoof prints and the ghosts of her resolve. She camped by a dry creek, her fire small, its embers glowing like her hope. A twig snapped, and her hand flew to her revolver. A figure stood at the edge of the firelight, tall and silent, his hair braided in a style that spoke of lands the government had tried to erase. His coat was patched, his face scarred above the brow, his eyes unreadable. He was the man she'd seen watching her in town, the one who moved like a shadow. "You're following me," she said, her voice low but sharp. He stepped closer, hands open, no weapon drawn. "You're not the only one hunting," he said, his voice quiet as the wind. "Fort Redemption's taken from me too." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. She lowered her gun, not out of trust but recognition. Pain had a way of binding strangers. "Ride with me then," she said, "but don't slow me down." He nodded, fading back into the dark, his presence a promise and a mystery. She stared into the fire, her daughter's face flickering in the flames. The trail to Fort Redemption was long, but she was closer now. And she wasn't alone. What binds 2 broken souls on a path to vengeance? Keep watching, because the desert hides more. Then secrets. Dawn broke over the Coyote's End desert like a wound, the sky bleeding red and gold across a land that offered no forgiveness. The air was sharp with the promise of a storm, clouds gathering like mourners on the horizon. She rode her black mare through a narrow canyon. the mare's hooves kicking up dust that clung to her patched coat. Her chestnut hair, cropped short, was damp with sweat beneath her wide-brimmed hat, and the scar on her chin gleamed faintly in the early light. At 32, she was a woman carved by grief, her heart a compass pointing to her stolen daughter. Beside her rode the man with braided hair, his scarred face unreadable, his patched coat flapping in the wind. He hadn't given his name, and she hadn't asked. Their alliance was forged in silence, bound by shared loss. His, a wound he didn't name. Hers, the daughter taken in a blaze of fire and cruelty. They followed the trail west toward Fort Redemption, a place whispered about in saloons and feared in prayers. The hoofprints of the three men, red bandana, missing finger, Confederate medal, were faint but clear, etched into the earth like a taunt. The canyon walls loomed high, their shadows swallowing the light. She felt the weight of her revolver at her hip, its grip a steady comfort against the ache in her chest. Memories clawed at her daughter's laughter, her small hands sketching stars on cabin walls, the night the fire stole everything. She'd crawled from the wreckage, lungs burning, only to find hoofprints in silence. The sheriff had shrugged, saying, "Girls go missing." But she hadn't grieved. She'd armed herself and followed. A gust of wind carried the scent of rain, and the mare snorted uneasy. The man raised a hand, signaling a halt. He dismounted, his boots silent on the rocky ground, and crouched to study the trail. "They're close," he said, his voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Camped here last night. Fire's cold, but the ashes are fresh." She nodded, her gaze scanning the canyon's edges where jagged rocks jutted like broken teeth. Danger hung in the air, thick as the gathering storm. They pressed on, the trail twisting through a dry riverbed. Thunder cracked overhead, and the first drops of rain stung her face, cold and relentless. The mare faltered, its hooves slipping on slick stone. She leaned forward, whispering, "Steady, girl," her voice a thread of calm in the chaos. The man rode ahead, his eyes sharp, tracking signs she couldn't see. Broken twigs, a scrap of red cloth snagged on a thorn. Her heart lurched. It was the bandana, its bone beads glinting in the rain. She dismounted, her gloved hand closing around the cloth. It was damp, stained with something dark, blood perhaps, or mud. "They're moving fast," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. The man nodded, his scar catching the dim light. "Fort Redemption's a day's ride, maybe less, but they know they're being followed." He didn't say more, but his silence spoke of traps, of men who killed to keep secrets. The rain thickened, turning the riverbed into a slurry of mud. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a grim discovery. A child's shoe, half buried in the muck, its leather cracked but unmistakable. She froze, her breath catching. It wasn't her daughter's, but it was close enough to tear open the wound. She knelt, her fingers brushing the shoe, and saw her daughter's face, pale, frightened, but alive. She had to be alive. The man placed a hand on her shoulder, brief but firm. "We keep moving," he said. They rode through the storm, the world a blur of rain and shadow. Her coat was soaked, her body aching, but her resolve burned brighter than the lightning. At dusk they found shelter in a shallow cave, its walls etched with old carvings, names, prayers, promises unkept. She built a small fire, its glow a fragile defiance against the dark. The man sat across from her, cleaning his knife with a reverence that spoke of battles fought and lost. "You ever think of stopping?" she asked, her voice barely above the crackle of the flames. He didn't look up. "Once," he said. "Didn't suit me." She nodded, understanding more than she said. Loss had a way of rewriting a person, stripping away everything but purpose. She pulled a small wooden charm from her pocket, a flower carved for her daughter, and held it tightly. The trail was treacherous, but she was closer now. And the storm wasn't the only thing breaking. What lies beyond the rain, where vengeance meets hope? Stay tuned, because the trail grows darker still. The desert sun climbed high over Coyote's End, New Mexico in the spring of 1884, scorching the earth until it cracked like old leather. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet sage and mud. She rode her black mare through a winding trail, the canyon walls now behind her replaced by rolling hills dotted with twisted junipers. Her chestnut hair, cropped short, stuck to her sweat-damp neck beneath her wide-brimmed hat. The scar on her chin burned under the sun's glare, a quiet reminder of battles survived. At 32, she was a mother with nothing left but a vow to find her daughter. The man with braided hair rode beside her, his scarred face a map of unspoken wars, his patched coat dusted with the red earth of their journey. They hadn't exchanged names, but their silence was a language of its own, forged in the shared ache of loss. His, a shadow he kept close. Hers, a daughter stolen by fire and cruelty. The trail to Fort Redemption was clearer now, marked by hoofprints and the weight of her resolve. The three men, red bandana with a scar, missing a finger, Confederate medal, were close, their tracks fresh in the softened ground. They crested a hill, the mare's hooves steady despite the heat. Below lay a valley, its heart pierced by a crumbling adobe chapel, its bell tower leaning like a drunkard. She reined in, her gloved hand tightening on the reins. Something about the chapel felt alive, as if it held a secret too heavy for its broken walls. The man dismounted, his boots kicking up dust, and scanned the ground. "They stopped here," he said, his voice low like a prayer spoken in a storm. "Not long ago, fire pits still warm." She slid from the saddle, her revolver a familiar weight at her hip. The chapel's door hung ajar, creaking in the breeze. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old stone and decay. Shattered pews littered the floor, and a faded cross hung crooked on the wall. Her breath caught as she saw it, a name carved into a beam, jagged and small, etched with a child's desperate hand. It was her daughter's name, scratched deep, a beacon in the dark. Her knees buckled, but she steadied herself, her fingers tracing the letters. "She was here," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope and fear. The man stood at the door, his silhouette framed by the harsh sunlight. "She's alive," he said, his words firm but soft, like a vow. They didn't stay. Moved west, toward Fort Redemption. She nodded, clutching the wooden charm in her pocket, a flower carved for her daughter, now a talisman of her mission. Outside, the man knelt by the fire pit, sifting through ashes. He held up a small object, glinting in the sun, a button, wooden, etched with a star, identical to the ones on her daughter's dress. Her heart lurched, a mix of relief and dread. "They're rushing," he said. "Something spooked them." She took the button, its edges worn but warm, as if it still carried her daughter's touch. "They know I'm coming," she said, her voice steel despite the ache in her chest. The trail grew treacherous, winding through rocky outcrops where shadows played tricks. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in shades of ember and ash. They rode without pause, the mare's breath heavy, the man's horse keeping pace. She felt the weight of time, each moment a theft from her daughter's safety. Memories flickered, her daughter's voice singing softly, her small hands braiding wildflowers. The night, the fire erased it all. She'd failed her once, but not again. As dusk settled, they found a shallow ravine, its walls offering cover. She dismounted, her body aching but her spirit unyielding. The man built a fire, its glow a fragile shield against the night. She sat, the button in her hand, its star catching the firelight. "Why do you help me?" she asked, her eyes on the flames. He didn't answer at first, his knife glinting as he sharpened it. "Because no one helped me," he said finally, his voice raw like a wound laid bare. She looked at him, seeing the man beneath the scars, a survivor like her, bound by a debt to the past. The night closed in, the stars above sharp as knives. Fort Redemption was near, its shadow looming like a predator. She held the button tightly, her daughter's name echoing in her heart. The trail was narrowing, and the truth was waiting. What does a mother find when she follows a child's cry into the dark? Don't miss the next step because the hunt is closing in. The moon hung low over the Coyote's End desert, its pale light casting Fort Redemption as a jagged scar against the night. In the spring of 1884, the air was thick with the stench of smoke and decay, drifting from the fort's rusted walls and oil barrel fires. She crouched on a rocky ridge, her black mare tethered below, its dark eyes steady in the shadows. Her chestnut hair, cropped short, was tucked beneath her wide-brimmed hat, and the scar on her chin gleamed faintly. At 32, she was a mother, fueled by a vow, her revolver a cold promise at her hip. Beside her, the man with braided hair scanned the fort, his scarred face unyielding, his patched coat blending with the night. Their alliance, born of shared loss, was a silent pact. Her daughter stolen by fire, his pain a story untold. Fort Redemption was no longer a military outpost but a den of outlaws, its barbed wire glinting like teeth. The three men, red bandana, with a scar missing a finger, Confederate medal, were inside, their trail ending here. She clutched the wooden button in her pocket, its star carving a tether to her daughter. They'd scouted the fort at dusk, noting the drunken patrols, the sagging gates, the breach in the western wall where stones had crumbled. "We go through. There," the man whispered, his voice a blade in the dark. She nodded, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The memory of her daughter's name carved in the chapel burned in her mind. Jagged letters, a child's cry for rescue. She wouldn't fail her now. They moved like ghosts, slipping down the ridge, their boots silent on the sandy earth. The breach was narrow, barely wide enough for a child, but she squeezed through, her coat catching on jagged stone. The man followed, his knife glinting in the moonlight. Inside, the fort was a maze of rotting barracks and rusted wagons, the air heavy with the reek of whiskey and unwashed bodies. Dogs snarled in the distance, their ribs sharp beneath mangy fur. She crouched behind a stack of crates, her breath shallow, every sense alert. A sound stopped her, a child's voice, faint, trembling from beneath the stables. Her heart lurched, and she moved without thought, weaving through shadows. Past. A snoring guard slumped against a post. The man signaled, his eyes sharp, covering her as she reached the stable's crooked doors. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the scent of hay and manure. She found a hatch hidden under sacks of grain, its iron hinges rusted but unbolted. She lifted it, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The man grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "It's a trap," he warned, his voice low. She met his eyes, her resolve unyielding. "Then I'll walk into it." She descended, the ladder creaking under her weight, the air growing colder with each step. A lantern flickered below, casting eerie shadows on stone walls. There, in a makeshift cage of wood and iron, was her daughter, pale, bruised, but alive, her eyes wide with recognition. Beside her, a boy, gaunt and silent, clutched the bars. "Mama," her daughter whispered, her voice a fragile thread. She tore at the cage, her hands shaking, the wood splintering under her strength. The latch gave way and her daughter fell into her arms, small and trembling, her warmth a miracle against the cold. She pulled the boy free, his eyes hollow but grateful. "We're leaving," she said, her voice fierce, a mother's command. Footsteps echoed above, followed by shouts. The guard had woken. She pushed the children up the ladder, her revolver drawn, her heart a drum beat of fear and fury. As they reached the stable floor, gunfire erupted outside. The man had drawn the fort's attention, his shots cracking like thunder. She shoved the children through a split in the stable's back wall, her coat tearing as she followed. A bullet grazed her shoulder, searing like fire. But she didn't falter. They ran, weaving through alleys of debris, the fort alive with chaos. Dogs barked, bells clanged, and boots pounded the earth. The man appeared, his knife bloodied, his face set, like stone. He grabbed the boy, nodding to the breach. "Go," he hissed. She clutched her daughter, blood seeping through her sleeve, and dove through the breach, the children scrambling beside her. Bullets whistled past, one nicking the mare's flank, but the horse stood firm. They mounted, her daughter pressed against her chest, the boy clinging to the man. The mare surged forward, hooves tearing through the desert, the fort's fires fading into the night. Her shoulder throbbed, but her daughter's heartbeat against hers was a lifeline. "You found me," the girl whispered, her voice a spark, in the dark. She held her tighter, tears burning her eyes. They were free but not safe. Can a mother's love outrun the shadows of vengeance? Keep watching, because the dawn brings new battles. The dawn broke gently over the Coyote's End Highlands, New Mexico, in the spring of 1884, painting the sky with hues of blush and gold, as if the world dared to hope again. She sat by a bubbling spring, its waters clear as glass, her black mare grazing nearby on patches of green. Her chestnut hair, cropped short, was streaked with dust, and the scar on her chin caught the soft light. At 32, she was a mother reborn, her daughter curled against her side, small hands clutching a tattered blanket. The pain in her shoulder where the bullet had grazed throbbed like a second heartbeat, but her heart was full. The man with braided hair stood watch on a rocky outcrop, his scarred face softened by the morning's glow, his patched coat swaying in the breeze. Their refuge, a hidden plateau ringed by junipers and ancient stone, was a sanctuary from the chaos of Fort Redemption. The fort's fires were a distant memory, but its shadow lingered. The three men, red bandana, missing finger, Confederate medal, were gone, one dead by her hand, the others lost to the desert's justice. Her daughter was safe, but the cost was etched in every line of her face. They'd ridden hard after the escape. The boy from the cage riding with the man, his hollow eyes slowly warming to the promise of freedom. They'd found this plateau by chance, guided by the man's knowledge of forgotten trails. The spring fed a small meadow, and a crumbling hunter's cabin offered shelter, its walls weathered but sturdy. She tended her wound with herbs the man provided, her hands shaking not from pain but from the weight of her daughter's warmth. The girl, barely 8, hadn't spoken much, but her eyes, bright, like her mother's, held a quiet strength. Days passed in a rhythm of survival and healing. The man taught the boy to snare rabbits, his knife flashing as he showed how to skin them cleanly. She braided her daughter's hair, weaving in wildflowers, each knot a silent vow to never lose her again. The boy, no older than 10, began to smile, his laughter mingling with the girls as they chased grasshoppers through the meadow. The man watched, his silence a steady anchor, his presence a shield against the world below. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the plateau, in a warm amber glow, she sat by the fire, the wooden button with its star carving in her hand. Her daughter slept nearby, her breath soft, a miracle in the stillness. The man joined her, his scarred hands resting on his knees. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice low, like the crackle of the flames. He looked into the fire, his eyes distant. "I lost a sister once," he said. "No one came for her. I couldn't let that happen again." She nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. They were bound not by blood but by choices, hers to fight, his to stand beside her. "What's next?" she asked, her gaze on the stars. He didn't answer at once, his knife glinting as he turned it in his hands. "There's a settlement, north," he said finally. "Good people, far from places like Fort Redemption. You could start over." She looked at her daughter, then at the boy, now whittling a stick by the fire's edge. "Not yet," she said. "They need time to forget the dark." He nodded, understanding more than she said. The plateau wasn't forever, but it was enough for now, a place where wounds could scar over, where laughter could bloom like the wildflowers in the meadow. She'd lost her home to fire, her heart to grief, but she'd gained something new, a family, fragile, but real. As the fire died to embers, she thought of the women who'd ridden before her, mothers and daughters who'd faced the West's cruelty and carved their own paths. Their stories, often unwritten, lived in the resilience of those who refuse to break. For history buffs and romantics, her journey reminds us that love, fierce, unyielding, can outlast fire and fear. In the American West, where survival demanded sacrifice, women like her proved that strength wasn't in the gun, but in the heart that kept fighting. Thank you for riding with us through this tale of fire and redemption. If her courage moved you, if you've ever fought for someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of the frontier's heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do for family? We read everyone. Until next time, keep chasing what matters.